So this is challenges and opportunities in the digital delivery of behavioral health, subject on which you two are both very well qualified to speak. The two panelists today are Dr. Jessica Lake and Professor Gavin Doherty. Since we have such distinguished panelists, I'll do the whole academic conference thing and tell you that Jessica got her PhD at Duke and did her postdoc at UCLA, and she's now the director of research at Limbix, where she's responsible for the development of their research strategy, development, execution. Execution is probably the more important part. And Limbix is about improving mental health with more accessible technology, particularly for teen depression, anxiety, and mental health. And the thing, the latest effort in that vein is Spark, Limbix Spark, which is at the clinical trial stage. And I'm sure we're going to hear a lot more about that, but they're taking the big step of going through the approval process to make it be prescribable, a prescribable digital therapeutic by doctors, which is, would be a tremendous thing, a tremendous tool for doctors to have in their toolkit for this type of treatment. And Gavin got his PhD at the University of York. He's a computer scientist, which is great. And was so brave. I went back and looked at your thesis. I hope I'm not embarrassing you, but I think it's very brave to apply formal methods to try and specify computer-human interaction. So I thought that was good. I haven't read it in detail yet, but I'm actually going to, so I may have questions.
That was a long time ago. York specialized in safety critical systems, so basically airplanes and things like that. So you had a lot of very funny case studies where there was a stereo that was really complicated, and then people were trying to operate. So
that's anyway. Interesting. Yeah, a perfectly spherical cow. Let's see. His focus is on human-computer interaction, particularly in health and most specifically in mental health technology, and specifically on patient engagement. And I would say, engagement quantity, engagement quality, and we're going to hear a lot about that. And he's had a couple of papers this year, which I won't go into, but I'll tell you they're in the JAMA and the actually, which of the computer-human interaction groups is your other paper published by? Which conference?
Well, there's been a bunch of papers. It's not been a bad year in terms of outputs. So there's a review on machine learning and mental health and ACM transactions on computer-human interaction, which might be of interest to this audience. There were also a couple of papers at CHI this year, which is the big human-computer interaction conference, which unfortunately wasn't in Hawaii as it was meant to be.
Maybe next year, right? Next year in Hawaii.
Yeah, but again, one of those was on machine learning and mental health, and particularly an analysis of support messages that were sent.
Got it. So I got sidetracked on your thesis. I didn't say you're now an associate professor at Trinity College, Dublin, and founder and scientific advisor at Silvercloud Health, which is a digital mental health platform, which, just like Limbix Spark and Limbix in general, I'm sure we're going to hear more about today. So why don't you both, Jessica and then Gavin, why don't you fill in any holes that I left in the intro, particularly around your latest work. For you, I think that would be Spark, and then what you're working on in engagement, Gavin.
Sure. So Limbix Spark is the main digital therapeutic that Limbix is focused on right now. It is a cognitive behavioral therapy-based program that we are taking through clinical trials right now to evaluate safety and effectiveness, with the ultimate goal of having it prescribed by doctors, similar to how you might prescribe a drug, as in this case as a medical device, and looking to position it primarily within primary care for pediatricians to prescribe to adolescents as a treatment for adolescent depression. And primarily looking for this product to be a way to increase access to mental health resources. Right now, pediatricians are, with much more prevalence, looking to screen for behavioral health issues. So we are identifying a lot more kids who are in need of help with a problem within the mental health space. One of the biggest problems is actually access to care. So once pediatricians identify that there is a behavioral health need, they have the option to prescribe antidepressants, which some may or may not be comfortable with. And then they have the alternative of referring a patient to a psychologist or a psychiatrist for further treatment or psychotherapy. But that's where sort of the access issues come into play. There just aren't enough mental health specialists to meet the demand right now. And so we're looking to position Spark as an adjunct treatment that a pediatrician can prescribe, either obviating the need for a patient to see a mental health specialist in maybe less severe cases, or at least providing some access to an evidence-based treatment before they're able to access a mental health specialist if they require that sort of additional care. And so at this point, we've done completed a feasibility trial of Spark that showed really promising early results, and are currently running a real-world evidence clinical trial right now, a randomized controlled trial that we're conducting fully virtually as a result of the COVID-19 crisis, and in many ways a response to the COVID-19 crisis, which has its sort of concomitant mental health repercussions, particularly when you think about teens and what they're going through right now in sort of the loss of different life events that they might have been able to participate in, graduation, moving to college. And so we're providing Spark as a resource and looking to further evaluate its safety and effectiveness within this particular strange moment in time.
Got it. So I have a ton of questions about that, particularly about the FAA process. FDA, FAA. You're not a plane crash, hopefully.
No.
And Gavin, go for it.
Okay, so we started out work in this area looking at engaging children and adolescents in psychotherapy through the use of mobile phones and games, and really looking at sort of augmenting that relationship with the therapist. I mean, initially we were like, maybe it can just be an icebreaker and that's fine, we don't need to be egotistical about it. But really it seemed that technology could kind of open up the therapeutic space a bit, provide people with, a means of expressing themselves, let's say in the case of children and adolescents, and also accessing kind of time between the therapy sessions. We then moved on to looking at online interventions. So there was evidence that these could be effective if people did them. But the interaction design of these systems was generally, the first generation was generally very poor. I mean, so the therapeutic content could be excellent and potentially very effective, but if people don't do it because the experience is not engaging and it's not meeting their needs and meeting them kind of where they are, then you're not going to get anywhere. I mean, no medical intervention is going to work if people don't do it. So we thought, okay, the key thing here really is engagement. Okay, there's been 100 years of research on psychotherapy. You've got a number of different approaches like cognitive behavioral therapy that really have quite a solid evidence base at this point, and which have been deployed at large scale. And so we're like, okay, if we can make this more engaging, then we can get better outcomes in the real world. Because it's one thing to do a little research study out of a world-class teaching hospital. It's very different when you get to the coalface of service delivery and all the messiness of people's kind of real lives and so on. So with Silvercloud then, we set out to develop a platform for delivering online human-supported mental and behavioral health interventions. Because again, we knew from our previous work that very often people needed a range of different interventions, and you've got people reinventing the wheel. So people doing work on new anxiety interventions coming up against the same problems as somebody developing depression interventions and so on. So we really thought there's an opportunity to have a platform that can deliver a range of programs. Now there's still a lot of individual design work to go on within each, but also there's a lot of common ground. So we built a platform, we put it into our kind of initial evaluations, we spun out a company based on that. And effectively, we've kind of grown, doubling our numbers pretty much kind of every year. We've had several randomized controlled trials showing clinical efficacy with quite open recruitment in terms of patients, so more representative of a real world kind of mix in terms of the services. At this point, we've had over 500,000 people through the interventions, which are, as I said, human supported, typically, let's say, between 8 and 12 weeks, depending on the person involved and depending on the service. We've a lot of evidence, both obviously from the randomized controlled trials, but also then from real-world service provision. So, for example, our interventions are used in over 300 services worldwide, but including in places like the NHS, where service delivery is quite standardized and they have a standard set of measures that everybody takes on a regular basis. Though all of those services have targets they've got to meet in terms of recovery, and so we can see the platform in real world kind of cases, not a study where all the hard cases have been excluded, but in real world settings is delivering kind of similar outcomes to the research studies. So interrupt me, Eric, by the way, if I go on for too long. So in terms of engagement, then we looked at a variety of different ways of improving that. First of all, making things a bit more interactive and less passive. So rather than here's a video, press the next button, here's a questionnaire, press the next button, that people could comment on things, kind of react to things a bit, to give people more control, so make it a more personal experience. A lot of people might have some history with mental health services. And so again, the previous approach was very much you do this, and then when you finish that, you're allowed to do the next bit, and when you finish that, you do the next bit. I mean, this makes for nice, clean studies. But in terms of real world delivery, it's not the best way of doing it. If something is not relevant to me, why are you making me sit through it? Okay, so to make it easy to follow a sensible path through an intervention, but to give people more control themselves over the experience, and even deciding, okay, I really like this tool, let's say for mood tracking, to allow them to put it on the homepage and make it accessible to themselves. Also then, there are the kind of social elements. So obviously, mental health is a very sensitive context. And so we were very careful about this. So we put some kind of light touch social elements. So being able to see, for example, that several thousand people have liked a particular exercise or particular video reinforces to me that, okay, I'm not the only person with these issues. And there are various places then where you can introduce kind of moderated kind of client kind of content. So certain written exercises that you might do, that you might then suggest what you've inputted that you'd be happy to kind of share with that, goes on a moderation queue, and then people can see there's some real kind of client content coming up in carefully chosen places throughout that. But obviously the key thing then is the human supporter. So this is really massively engaging. If I take somebody with major depression, say, go off and do this by yourselves, that's a really tough challenge in terms of design and in terms of not having people kind of drop out. If I'm told, okay, go off and do this next week, your clinician is going to check in with you, see how you're doing, and review your progress, then I'm much more likely to stay engaged. And we give our clients control over how much information is shared with, again, this can vary according to the service and policies, but generally we try and give the user control. And so even if people didn't share a lot, let's say their thoughts, feelings, behaviors, exercises with the therapist, just that having somebody there turns out to be really significant. It's like, well, they were there if I needed them, and that kind of helped keep them on track. So we have a number of then kind of different strategies we use to improve engagement.
So that's fascinating. I want to come back to some of that, particularly around how you're using data science to actually measure that, because it seems like it would be terrifically complicated. Like you said, it's not just when you click on the next button. Before we get there, I want to jump back to Jessica. Can you maybe tell us the interesting bits about dealing with the approval process? Because you're going through roughly the same process that like a CPAP machine goes through, or an Apple Watch for its pulse oximeter stuff. So how has that been, and how has that informed how you think about this problem space?
Yeah, I think it's been a really interesting path to follow as sort of a digital product, which you don't, a mobile app that you don't necessarily think of as a medical device in sort of the traditional sense. And so I think what we've learned is that, we need to be demonstrating, the FDA process is all about demonstrating clinical safety and effectiveness. And that's very much in line with sort of our idea for what we want our product to be presented as, really showing rigorous clinical data to support the use of this product. And there are many apps out there that are cognitive behavioral therapy based, and you can download them on the App Store. And some of them are great, but some of them don't have sort of the rigorous clinical efficacy to support their use. And so going through the FDA pathway, we really are focused on that clinical efficacy and safety, and as well as privacy, as well as a big part of making sure that we're protecting patient data. And so I don't know if those are the interesting pieces of this or not. That's, I guess, up to interpretation. I think one of the things that's most interesting as we think about being able to demonstrate clinical efficacy is the FDA has sort of continued to raise the bar for what they're looking to see in terms of clinical effectiveness for these digital treatments for specifically in our case for psychiatric disorders. And so that has involved in our case, if you were taking a drug through an FDA regulatory process, you would need to compare your drug either to an already established drug that's on the market or to a placebo condition, a sugar pill. And the FDA is really now looking for that level of rigor in testing digital interventions. And if you think about it, that's pretty hard to imagine what is sort of the equivalent of a sugar pill for a mobile app. And so what we have been doing is developing a sham condition, so a placebo app. So, but actually, when you kind of think through what that involves, how do you create a mobile app that will look and feel like a treatment, but actually not deliver any elements of sort of active ingredients, if you will, of a digital intervention. And so that's been a really unique challenge to think through, and has involved, we've put together different testing to make sure that this is, the description of the sham app, as we call it, that we are developing, get sort of similar ratings in terms of how adolescents might and their parents might rate their expectation for treatment benefit to our app, and then being able to create an actual mobile app experience that seems well polished and seems like it could be a real treatment, but actually isn't delivering any active ingredients. So that's, I think, maybe one of the most interesting things about going through this process that we've thought through.
So how does that work in the presence of these patients who need some kind of intervention? This is the dilemma, right? How do you do a mask trial? It's the same question in a sense, right? So how does that work for you?
Yeah, so we're not at the point of doing those sort of double-blinded studies, but that is what our final pivotal trial is designed to look like. And so again, we are looking to ensure that there is sort of blinding, where both the participant and the researchers and everyone involved in interacting with patients doesn't know whether the participant is receiving the treatment app or the control app. And I think in the same way that this has some ethical implications when we're thinking about drugs, we do expect to provide the treatment condition to individuals in our control arm after they've gone through the sham app in many of our trial designs, as a way to provide access to the actual treatment itself. But that is sort of the nature of these types of trials, that you do need a control condition. And we do think, within the context of a clinical trial with a lot of medical monitoring to support safety, that we can sort of run through the same sort of trial design that we see in drug studies as well.
Right on. Yeah, no, you have to do it. That's just interested how you were thinking about it. So Spark is also supported by a human therapist, correct?
So it's the program itself is self-guided. The way that we sort of think about human support in the context of Spark is it's given that it's prescribed by a doctor, that we believe that sort of oversight by a clinician is going to serve as some element of clinical support as well. And so we're looking to position this within primarily pediatric practices, primary care, although we could very easily see it working within a psychiatric clinic as well as sort of an adjunct to medication potentially. And we are looking to sort of evaluate how Spark fares as a standalone product versus as an adjunct to other forms of treatment. But the clinician, as sort of the prescriber, we think if they're going to then be checking back in with the patient, that provides sort of a level of human support and oversight where someone feels like their progress is being followed. And we are also in the process of developing a provider-facing portal and talking to pediatricians and psychiatrists to get a sense of what information they would like within that portal as a way to both support the safety of the product when it's actually implemented in sort of the real world, providing them symptom data over time as they need it, and working through some of the challenges of not making providers have to be available 24/7 to support any emergency situations, but being able to provide them with the information that they need to ensure that their patients are safe in collaboration with our group. And so that's sort of where the human support comes in our case. And I think in the future there are other ways to think about incorporating human support. We've talked about involving a support figure that the adolescent themselves sort of identify as someone, a trusted adult who they would like to be sort of a part of that process, whether it's a parent or some other trusted figure. But we certainly are aware that human support is really important, as Gavin mentioned, in terms of encouraging engagement with the product to feel like you have a support and you're not just sort of on your own with a digital product.
Yep, for sure. Fascinating. So this one is for both of you. I was going to say this one's maybe more for Gavin, but I don't think it actually is. So I have a book I've been meaning to revisit for some time. I loved it when I read it the first time. It's called The Man Who Lied to His Laptop. And it's a fascinating book, but basically it says that, given the opportunity, humans will attribute personality and human-like characteristics to the devices in their life. And so, I guess I'm interested in how, what kind of a, I'm going to use clinically terrible words. What kinds of attachments do people, form to the different therapeutic that you guys are providing through Silvercloud and through Limbix? And just to make sure we don't forget it, there's a question from the audience about design thinking. The question is specifically, how about design thinking approaches to patient engagement? And so if that works into the answer, otherwise I'll come back to it, but if that works into the answer, that would be interesting.
Yeah, so I mean, people talk about these media effects in terms of them treating them kind of like people, as it were. There's an important in the kind of mental health space. I mean, Jessica can talk about this more than me, perhaps, but there's a concept of Therapeutic Alliance, which actually is a very significant factor in getting good outcomes. So there's a greater sense of alliance with the therapist generally. It's going to lead to improved outcomes. That's actually been shown to apply to computer-based sort of interventions. I mean, I think it's not really in doubt where you're talking about a human-supported intervention, because there's actually a real person there. And so it's no different to any other kind of computer-mediated kind of communication in terms of that relationship. However, I think there are also some potential advantages of digital interventions. I mean, this is something that comes up a lot with the user-facing work we do, which I think partly addresses the design kind of thinking element. So it's the anonymity is really a draw for a lot of people. I mean, there is a big stigma around kind of mental health. There are a lot of personal, social, and kind of employment consequences around it. And so we've had a lot of feedback from various studies over the years where people explicitly said it was because it was anonymous that they wanted to do it, rather than sort of risk the repercussions of people finding out, and also just the stress and worry associated with that that might prevent somebody from seeking help earlier, which is really important, because it's much easier, again, to get a good outcome sort of if you seek help a bit earlier, rather than when things are really getting to be a bit much, and you know, kind of various things might be happening that are going to be unhelpful sort of overall in terms of getting better. So from my perspective, yes, there is a relationship. I mean, because, you know, generally there's a real person sort of anyway, and we look at ways from a design perspective of enhancing that and that sense of accountability, which also helps in terms of motivation. But also it's enough, but not too much, you know, because also there's the online disclosure effect that people are often more honest in disclosing kind of things to a computer. And in fact, I've got a new research student starting looking at speech-based kind of mood logging in terms of literally talking to computers about how you feel.
Yeah, and yeah, I totally agree with everything that you're saying, Gavin. And, you know, thinking about the Digital Therapeutic Alliance is something that we think about a lot in our program, Limbix Spark, you know, gearing towards a younger audience. We have a sort of avatar named Limbot, who is sort of your guide through the program. And in our user feedback sessions that we have with participants who have gone through our program, they love Limbot. In the beginning of the program, you get to choose which Limbot you want. You know, he has different costumes that he or she can wear, and just sort of that ability to personalize Limbot and serve as sort of your guide through the program. It's very clear that people who have gone through our program have really developed a rapport with this digital character, and I think that sort of adds to the engagement of the program. And we also are really interested, you know, given that we're working with this younger audience, to make sure that the program is engaging, that they feel supported throughout this self-guided program. And so we spend a lot of time working with adolescents to working directly with them in sort of design sprints and different user testing environments to get their direct feedback that we use to continue to improve our product. And yeah, because that engagement piece is really important. Getting the perspective of our users is really critical to that process.
So the last 10 years in lots of different ways has been about the gamification of the internet in all sorts of ways, right? So does any of that game thinking, gamification, whatever you want to call it, some people just call it manipulation, does any of that play into the designs of your respective therapies, products?
Well, I suppose sorry, Jessica, do you want to go first on this?
Sure. Yeah, so Limbix Spark is not a game per se, but we do definitely think about gamification elements in improving engagement. So thinking about, you know, Limbix Spark has different levels, and we are thinking about incorporating different reward system elements to give people a sense of, you know, positive reinforcement as they go through the program, and using those sorts of elements that increase engagement with programs within the context of the program, just to increase engagement. And so we're thinking about things again like reward systems and different, you know, it comes down to a lot of different cognitive strategies to increase motivation and increase sort of positive reinforcement that we're relying on to enhance engagement. And so that's sort of how we incorporate those elements within Spark.
Got it. What about you, Gavin?
So as I said, actually, we started out in the child and adolescent space. So we were explicitly looking at computer games as a medium for developing kind of therapies, and also looked at allowing subject matter experts to produce content for games, because we had people saying, oh, the game you've done is great. Can you do one for girls or boys or anger management or, you know, intellectual disability and so on? And so we really wanted to empower clinicians and experts. You'd only need a small number of experts to create new content. And the game metaphors could be really kind of helpful. So one of the most, well, certainly the most successful game that was produced with the tools we developed was a Cbt game for children. Now, Cbt is, you know, there's developmental issues with that in terms of the metacognitive kind of skills you want people to acquire. And so they had this metaphor of the negative automatic thoughts being these little creatures, these gnats that would sting you. And so it provided a language and a way for them to get to grips with it. But we did spend a lot of time in terms of design, being careful about the issue that they were engaging with the therapy, through the game, and they weren't just engaging with the game as a way of kind of shutting off some of these awkward kind of conversations. Various different strategies for that. So that was all kind of pre-Silvercloud. With Silvercloud, we started out with some very light touch gamification elements, just as a way maybe this could improve engagement of little achievements associated with the modules. And actually, we stripped it back to still appeal to the same kind of person, because some people want to go through everything, So we allow the kind of people who would like to complete, and let's say, if there's a certain number of topics in a module, they want to make sure they've done it all, they can easily see that. But we sort of made it less in your face and less explicit about it, because you get mixed feedback kind of on this. There's some work Jakob Bardrum in Denmark did around bipolar, where people kind of said things like, I don't want my illness reduced to a game. So I think you do have to be a bit sensitive kind of about it.
That makes sense. So just for the audience, the last 10 minutes is theoretically for questions, so please feel free to pile on. I'll take one from the audience now. So what has been the response from clinicians? I don't know, can you guys also see the chat? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, so let's take that one. What's been the response from clinicians for your tools?
Yeah, we've spent a lot of time talking to clinicians and various types of clinicians. Again, we're looking to primarily position Spark within primary care, but we've talked to psychiatrists and psychologists and other mental health specialists as well, to get a sense of how they would feel about this program, how comfortable they would be prescribing this to their patients as well. And within pediatric care, I think there is a real enthusiasm for this product. I think pediatricians feel a little stuck, and they really care about their patients. They don't have the training to be doing themselves, the intensive psychotherapy that would be required to help a patient who right now is unable to access additional care when they surface those again, behavioral health issues. And so they can prescribe antidepressants. Again, some of them don't feel comfortable doing that, but they really are looking for other options because they are so limited. Even antidepressants, there are very few that are indicated for adolescents, and they're not particularly effective. So pediatricians, I think, are really hungry for alternative options for ways to treat their patients. And when we talk to psychiatrists, they're also really interested in Spark and whether or not it could be effective as an adjunct to medication for maybe more severe cases as well. And we are really interested too to see if Spark is additive on top of psychotherapy delivered in sort of face-to-face therapy too. But again, we are sort of thinking of Spark as maybe a first-line defense before that more intensive type of therapy is required. And we really have been getting overwhelmingly positive feedback from providers. I think sorry, I was just going to say one last thing, that I think that the main challenge that we'll have to figure out is integrating this program into workflows in a way that doesn't add to the burdens, particularly of a primary care provider who is very overworked and doesn't have the time to sort of follow this program, maybe even on a weekly basis. So making sure that we're building out a platform that's provider facing, that is easy for them to implement. And so we're really having those conversations now to make sure, and there probably isn't one size fits all solution to this, but making sure that we're providing the tools that this is a seamless product.
Got it. You actually answered the question I was going to ask mostly, because I was going to say, doesn't this produce a lot of notes and other stuff in the medical record that just has to be dealt with by the primary, and in some sense, it seems like it'd be easier to make the referral, but maybe they want something in between. I can assume that a referral to a mental health professional feels like a big step, even if, from a medical perspective, maybe it's not, it's not necessarily indicative of anything, but the patient might feel like it's a big step.
Right. Yeah, I think there certainly is that element of it. We've talked to a lot of pediatricians who say, I refer of the the percentage of participants that I refer to specialized care, only a very small percentage of those people actually end up going to see a psychologist, either because it's difficult to find one who is covered by your insurance. It's difficult to find someone who has immediate availability. And then there are just the basic logistical issues with, we're finding solutions to that now, I think, in the middle of this pandemic and, exploring the ways to utilize telehealth. But, the logistical and time constraints, particularly for parents in getting, transportation to see a psychotherapist. And there just are a lot of barriers to that care. So this is sort of another tool that, a doctor can write a prescription and then the patient can download it right on their phone that day.
Makes sense. I in the interest of time, Gavin, I kind of want to get onto Karina's question and let you take first shot at that one. But if you have anything to add to Jessica's answer on the responsive clinicians, that'd be terrific if you get a 30-second version.
Yeah, so, well, first of all, I think it's changed a lot over the time we've been operating. I mean, mental health was very late to the game in terms of technology compared to other parts of medicine. So I think attitudes have changed. We deal, with services sort of largely, but we're in over 300 services. So obviously we've gone through due diligence many times. But like Jessica, all of our design work was rooted in talking to every possible stakeholder group that we could get a hold, because a lot of different people are involved in mental health, from social workers through to psychiatrists, clinical psychologists, counseling psychologists, and so on. I think our conversations are different, again, maybe like Jessica, because we're trying to extend clinicians' reach and allow them to deliver more therapy effectively. And so I think that's a key different, compared to some companies that are maybe claiming, oh, we'll automate all of this. It's a very different message saying, we'll allow you to treat more people. And even in our very first study, we had a surprise in terms of clinicians who weren't even that keen on CBT, who really liked the interpersonal work. We're like, well, I thought they started signing up their face-to-face clients for Silvercloud in parallel. They were like, well, they can do the CBT stuff, which I thought they'd benefit from using kind of the online platform, and we'll do the face-to-face sessions, on the interpersonal stuff. So I think there's a lot of modalities in terms of clinician involvement that just haven't been explored as much. We're still in the early stages, I think, of this development. Okay, in terms of the data science stuff, this has been a big focus for the last couple of years for us. So back in, I think, 2015, I did some work with Cecily Morrison, who was at the time in the University of Cambridge, then moved on to Microsoft Research. Incidentally, she got an MBE from the Queen yesterday. Quite nice news. On visualizing people's engagement data to really try and we had interviews, and the visualizations were really able to do a deep dive in terms of people's engagement and see they were kind of redoing the therapy, and all kinds of interesting things were going on. And we could see various different patterns of engagement. Of some people were very linear, other people would cast around until they found something which kind of resonated with them. And we thought, this is great. We can do an analysis because we've got hundreds of thousands of users. We can do some statistical analysis and extract personas kind of out from this, and kind of then start trying to personalize for them. But using standard statistical methods, it was just hopeless. There are too many moving parts in a CBT kind of intervention. It was really difficult. So we started a partnership with Microsoft Research in Cambridge then, not with Cecily, but it was nice that she was involved there. Really, that's been a very interesting kind of journey that we're making our way through. So initially we were looking at just classifying kind of different users groups, saying, are there different types of users in terms of their engagement? And indeed there are. So that's the JAMA Network Open paper that came out this year. We did some other analysis of supporter messages, and we're able to extract that certain types of supporter messages that used kind of certain types of language, more kind of concrete, less abstract kind of language, emphasizing social behaviors and so on, were more effective. And we're stepping through a process, looking then at kind of prediction and personalization as the ultimate outcomes. But I would say it's hard, it's difficult. It's by no means, and interdisciplinary work is always hard, but it's a difficult problem.
So if this is if this is a relatively easy question to answer, let's answer it. But otherwise, let's shelve it because we're running up on time here. We got about four minutes. Although I'm told we can run a little bit over if we're having fun and we're being interesting. How are you doing feature selection? Because you're using some ML techniques in your data science. So how are you doing the feature selection? Like, are you using automated techniques to select the features as well? Or is that all human feature selection? Okay, that's a long question.
So I don't, first of all, I don't think I'm the best person kind of to answer that. Obviously, there are certain things we have certain data, I guess, is the starting point in terms of what's tracked in terms of people's engagement. And we have the clinical outcomes in terms of, for a large portion of users, we have standard clinical measures like PHQ-9 and kind of GAT-7. And so really we're looking to relate sort of the engagement and bringing it down to, again, relatively simple kind of categories. Now, within the methods, I'd have to refer you to the papers to talk about them, because what essentially happens is the machine learning kind of folks do a bunch of analysis and we go, what does it mean? How can I use this in terms of design? And we have kind of conversations about that. But there have been so many different analyses we've done over the last kind of 3 years. Yeah. I couldn't give you a mix of both, to be honest. I think
fair enough. Jessica, how are you guys using data science and machine learning?
So I think, we're a little early stage right now. We don't have sort of the extensive data right now to be really mining for that type of data, but we are thinking about those problems right now and looking at identifying the types of users that we do have and taking sort of a very similar approach to what Gavin has outlined and starting this thought process early in thinking about the types of patterns that people are using and going through our app, how that relates to outcomes, and looking to see if we see any relationship between the different types of users and how they actually perform. And so it's definitely something that we are interested in doing once we have sort of the volume of data to get sort of meaningful conclusions from. And we are very thoughtfully thinking about those questions right now and are excited to deploy those techniques when we have the large scale data to do it.
Got it. All right. So one last question. We'll finish strong, like a minute or a minute and a half from each of you, because we'll be firmly over time at that point. I know you're very focused on Spark and the trials and whatnot, but opening the aperture up a little bit, let's take a quick swipe at Nicole's question. What's next? What are the big problems? She's asking, what advice do you have for product developers who want to pivot to behavioral health tech? And so let's assume, as I'm sure is a safe assumption, that Spark is going to be a tremendous success. Like, what's next? And then the same question to you, Gavin. What's next, and what are the frontiers here?
Yeah, I think there still is just so little that we know about how to personalize digital health programs to treat individuals. I think a lot of the data science work that we're doing will end up informing how we can personalize products to increase their efficacy for different individuals. But that's sort of where I see the great potential of digital tools and AI to be able to improve upon what we can do as just humans in supporting mental health issues. But I think really being able to identify how we can target programs more specifically to individuals is really going to be profoundly impactful in improving mental health. And so I think that's sort of the next phase of digital health interventions is a lot more personalization based on a wealth of data that we will end up having from the use of these programs.
Right on. Gavin?
Yeah, well, I'd agree the whole kind of precision medicine sort of element in terms of what's going to be the most effective for this person, both in terms of their engagement and engaging with the right things, yeah, for that particular kind of type of person. Because even within depression, you know, there's a lot of variety in terms of how your symptoms are distributed and how much personal circumstances are impacting on that. A lot of my more recent work with my sort of university kind of hat on has been around momentary interventions and momentary assessment. So we know, again, even in terms of online CBT interventions, that people often use them as a momentary support in terms of feeling down, and they'll go kind of looking for help there. But we've got these wearable devices, we've got our mobile phones, which are powerful computers. But how do we integrate kind of those together? Because a few little behavioral nudges are not going to treat, like clinical anxiety, for example. You know, they could be part of it, and part of bringing the therapy out into the world. And I think it's an interesting question of how do you reconcile, you know, these smaller sort of momentary kind of elements with, you know, a more substantial kind of program of treatment. So that's quite an interesting area. On the AI side of things, then as well, we did a couple of recent reviews where people are really focusing on diagnosis and detecting kind of depression and anxiety and stress and so on. And the use cases for that are really not so. I mean, I've been working in this area for a while, and I'm really interested in the use of technology in the area. The use cases of that could be practically deployed are very hard for me to see. But this is where most of the effort so far has gone. I mean, if you want to get a diagnosis, then you can use the, you know, standard measures that are out there, or, you know, you really want to go kind of deeper, you know, diagnostic interviews. But even the standard measures will give you better data than what you will get from any of these automatic kind of recognition systems. So it's a question of how it's useful. Now, we did some work around kind of bipolar a couple of years ago, where somebody might be alerted, let's say, to, you know, how their social rhythms weren't so regular and so on. And so there are use cases there, but they're not necessarily straightforward. So I'd say also make sure you're addressing a real problem that clinicians tell you is a real problem, rather than, well, we could have this data, and I know
what can we do with it?
Yeah,
I'm much more optimistic on that type of technology. I'm much more optimistic that you can have something of an advocate in your pocket versus a therapist in your pocket. To be quite honest. Okay, last very quick question. Did your colleague get her MBE over Zoom, or did she quarantine for 14 days and meet with the Queen?
I know I haven't talked to her about it. I just thought it was
it's tremendous. But now I feel like we need to know. You have to follow up with AILA and let us know if that happened over Zoom. All right.
Well, she works in the UK, so she's going to be given a terrible time, I'm sure, by her colleagues.
Exactly. All right. Well, I want to thank you both for making time to share this virtual stage with me and talk to the audience here. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Eric.
Yeah, thank you all for an amazing panel discussion. Really learned a lot, and can't wait to be able to post this up on YouTube and have everyone else get to check it out as well. And so I think if there's any extra questions, I feel everyone can reach out directly to Eric, Jessica, or Gavin. Their contact information is located within the chat. But for next step, for the next hour, we'd love for all of you to meet each other. So if you click on the left-hand side, there's a networking button that says now, you know, and you can go into these chat roulettes, about 3 to 10 minutes one-on-one video conference calls, and meet other people in this other attendees that are here. And then we'll see you all back at 4 p.m. For our keynotes and another 3 hours worth of great content. And so thank you all for the first day of our second annual Life Summit. And thank you, Eric and VYNYL, for being a loyal supporter both years in a row. All right.
Happy to be here.
Great session. Thank you, guys.